Hello, my name is Nikki Sappington. I'm the Grant Support Coordinator for the English Language Center at Howard Community College. So I have an administrative position where I help support our grant-funded ESL classes and their teachers, but I'm also an adjunct teacher myself, and I teach my own classes. So that is to say that this presentation comes from a very practical place too. It comes from personal experience as well. And so my colleague and I, Katie Edwards, we gave this presentation or we developed this presentation last year, and it really happened because we saw a huge need for it. So we went from teaching before COVID, while we had some computer literacy in our program, we did not require all of our classes to use lab. And so the lowest levels are, new beginners, our literacy students didn't go to lab. So when COVID hit and everything needed to transfer to an online format, we obviously there saw that there was a huge need for digital literacy skills for all of our students. So as we have transitioned back into the classroom in person, and so most of our classes are back in the classroom, we expanded our digital literacy offerings. And so now all of our classes, no matter the level or the content, they have some computer lab component. And as we were integrating digital literacy skills in our classes, simply put, we found that it's hard. And I'm sure that you've had this experience as well. And I'm sure you have many ideas too. But my colleague Katie and I reflected on this. We looked at the research, we looked at, we took from our personal experiences, and we took from the personal experiences of our teachers as well to kind of pull this presentation together and give some ideas about how we can teach digital literacy skills to our students and teach with technology when our students have a wide range of digital literacy skills. So this is the agenda for the presentation. There'll be a quick introduction just to define what is differentiation. And then the heart of the presentation is going through strategies for digital differentiation, divided into 4 parts of the teaching process. So starting with our mindset, planning, teaching, and then reflecting. At the end of the presentation, I will share a Google Doc that has links for all the resources, digital tools, and some of the research that I share here. So don't feel like you have to catch everything as it goes through the presentation. So let's jump into things. So what is differentiation? Why is integrating digital literacy so hard in our class? Well, some of our students are going to come to us already having advanced digital literacy skills. They might even know how to do more than you do. Some will know how to do some things, and others will know how to do other things. And then you'll get students with very low digital literacy skills, maybe students who have never used a computer before. And this is where differentiation comes in. Differentiation is simply using strategies to ensure that every student is engaged and learning at their own pace. So this may mean different students doing different things that lead to the achievement of a common goal. It may mean using added supports and scaffolds, or it can mean individualized learning. So as teachers, we're already constantly differentiating depending on our students' English ability, because there's always variance in student ability, even within one class. So students have their strengths and their weaknesses, and we adjust to that. It's simply good teaching. So in addition to adapting to your students' differing English skills, you're also going to have to adapt to their digital literacy skills. So hopping into some strategies. So again, these aren't theoretical ideas. They're ideas that we've taken from our own teaching and from our own trial and error as well. So as mentioned, we're breaking our strategies down into sequential parts. And so we're going to start with the mindset. So before you even start planning your classes, computer lab or digital literacy component, before you even walk into the classroom, these first set of strategies has to do with your mindset. So there are a few truths as teachers that we have to be at peace with, because our mindset, our preconceptions, Our preferences can and likely will rub off on our students. So if you're going into the semester crossing your fingers for a group of students who already know how to use a computer, don't do that, because your disappointment at finding out you have a student who's never touched a computer before, that can show through unintentionally to that student. So tell yourself or remind yourself of these things. My students will come to me with different digital skills. That's okay. And it isn't a student's fault if they do come to you with lower than average digital literacy skills. All of my students can learn to use technology. No one is a hopeless case. And my students will learn new digital skills at different paces. There will be technology blips. I'm not going to panic when they happen. And even I have to go back and remind myself of this one too, because no matter how prepared you are, no matter how high your digital literacy skills are, there can still be those technology blips. So instead, tell yourself, I don't need to know how to do everything, but I can model how to figure things out. So the same way we show our students that mistakes are opportunities for growth in learning English, we need to model that tech mistakes are okay and that we can learn from them. So I love this example. It comes from an article called The Digital Learning Mindset by Joey Lehrman. So let's say a student comes to you and they ask a question, let's say about a feature in Google Docs, and you're not sure. You don't know how to answer that. You don't know how to use that. So instead of getting really nervous and sweating and panicky, think, I don't know, but let's take a look together, or model that with your student. So that may be kind of modeling how to kind of try it out with your student there. It may mean telling your student, I'm going to go check on this after class and I'll get back to you the next class. Maybe you research it later, or maybe you go to a tech resource in your program later and you get back to your student the next time. So by doing this, Lehrman says, we are modeling what digital age learning can look like. Because of the nature of technology, because it's so rapidly changing and evolving at an ever increasing pace, we're all actually digital learners, and we're all going to be digital learners for the rest of our lives. In your classroom, you're not going to be a digital expert. That's okay. And we're not going to be able to make our students into digital experts. Again, that's okay. But what we can and should model for students is that growth mindset when it comes to digital skills. So we want our students to have what's called digital resilience. Digital resilience is the awareness, the skills, agility, and confidence to be empowered users of new technologies and to adapt to changing digital demands. So we can't possibly teach students all the tech skills they'll need to use in their daily lives, their workplace, or their schooling, because there's always going to be new ones. But we want them to be able to adapt and be able to pivot and apply what digital skills they do have to technologies that they'll learn in the future. We want them not to panic when they sit down in front of a computer or come across a new technology. So with our proper mindset in place, let's take a look at planning. So when planning, we've actually got to start with an honest assessment of our own abilities. So all of us are starting at different places when it comes to our own digital literacy and technology skills. So how do we do that? Well, one tool that our program has used a lot is the digital literacy wheel, which you see here from Maryland Department of Labor Digital Literacy Framework. So it's this great visual of 7 interconnected elements that they say make up digital literacy. So when we talk about digital literacy, this is a great reminder that we're not just talking about the technical know-how of how to type or how to physically use the tech equipment, but digital literacy is a lot broader than just that technical piece. The Maryland Department of Labor Digital Literacy Framework has great guiding questions for each of these elements of digital literacy. And these questions can apply not just to our students, but to ourselves as well. So there are questions like, am I confident working with new applications, tools, and software? Am I able to develop or adapt digital content suitable for different platforms and audiences? Do I present myself appropriately in digital contexts? How do I give clear guidelines for others to follow? So this is a great tool for yourself to look through and kind of ask yourself these questions about your own digital literacy skills. Beyond that, we can dig deeper into specific tools and resources. So I find that asking these questions can be helpful. So let's say a specific tool like using Kahoot. So take your tech tool and ask yourself these questions about those different tech tools. Can I use this with pre-existing materials? Can I explain to other people how to use it? Can I create new materials with Kahoot? And can I do these different things comfortably? Or am I nervous when I do them? So asking ourselves how we feel about things is helpful. And then even beyond that, where can I go to learn more? Where can I go? Do I know someone that can teach me about Kahoot? Where can I look to learn more? So we often use graphic organizers like this with our students, but they can be helpful for ourselves too. So whether or not you actually write this down or you just think about it like this in your head, it's helpful to think about the resources, the tools, and the skills in these different 3 categories. First, think about what tools you're required to use for your teaching. So for example, at HCC, we're required to use Canvas. I feel pretty comfortable with Canvas, so that goes in my comfortable column. If you have a required technology tool that you aren't comfortable with, you should probably prioritize that one, putting that first in the want to learn category. Second, you might be using, or you probably are using technology or digital tools that aren't required. Not required, but I use Google Slides and Quizlet, and I feel pretty good about how to use those. So those are going to go into my comfortable category. So, and then think about tech tools you've heard about or seen other teachers use. You'll have to decide whether it fits into that want to learn category or the not yet category. For example, I saw a fellow teacher use the tool ThingLink, which enables you to add clickable audio to an image. And I could immediately envision how I could use that with my students and how it would be beneficial. I've started poking around with it and I've tried a few simple things with it, but I definitely need to learn more. So I'm going to put that in my want to learn category. On the other hand, I saw a presentation recently with a presenter who used Wakelet. I think it would be really handy, but I have no immediate uses for it right now. So I'm going to put it in my not yet column. I think the key here is to not overwhelm yourself and choose too many things. You know, there are a plethora of digital tools out there and we can't possibly learn them all at once, and we don't want to spread ourselves thin. So try and prioritize the things that you want to learn. And put some things on the not yet category if you still want to learn them as well later. And thinking about things this way is helpful for pushing yourself to introduce new things to your students. Like I'm not going to experiment for the first time in my class, or I'm not going to experiment for the first time in the class with something I want to learn, but I'm going to develop that additional proficiency first. I'm going to teach, or I'm going to introduce new tech skills to my students that I already feel comfortable with. So it's great to know where we are as teachers, but we also need to know where our students are. So assess your students. In our program, we work to create different options for observations checklists as a way that you can informally assess students' digital skills. So if you use computers in person with students, you can walk around the classroom and see where they are excelling or where they're having trouble. You can either do this as a whole class, for example, the checklist on the left, you can put a list of your students in that column, or maybe you do it individually, dive in more in depth for each individual student, like the digital literacy checklist on the right. So even just walking around and seeing how students are doing with entering their passwords. Or do they know how to use the shift key to capitalize letters, or can they use a mouse? So even those small steps go a long way towards understanding what students' tech needs are. You can also use different digital skills assessments to see how your students are doing. For example, my English lab, which you may be familiar with if you use Pearson's Future textbooks, they have a digital literacy component where students can put their skills into practice. So different things like using the mouse, what do these different keys mean? Another great resource that you may be familiar with is North Star Digital Literacy. So they have free assessments on various digital skills that students can do, from computer basics to internet savvy. One caution is that sometimes we found that students struggle with the language rather than the technology, since this was not made specifically for ESL students. So that sort of thing is definitely something to keep in mind when choosing an assessment. But our students are also capable adults, so you can ask them directly what they know. So I often use get to know you questions on my first day of class. And recently I started adding a few extra questions about digital literacy. So even just knowing if your students have a computer at home, do they have to use a computer at work? How do they feel about using a computer? Again, that goes a long way into knowing what sort of needs your students will have. The example on the right is something that you can put into your learning management system if you're teaching students online, if you have a Zoom class or another platform online. Again, asking your students how they feel about using computers is important as well, because we talk about lowering students' affective filter all the time in English teaching. So we want the same thing to be true for their learning technology skills as well. Another great option for assessing your students is using a digital survey. So this example, which is included in the resource document at the end of the presentation, it was created by Rachel Riggs, and it's under a Creative Commons license, which means you can edit this. It's a Google form. So if one of the questions doesn't apply as much to your students, you can delete it, you can add a question. I love the use of pictures and the checklists. I think that's very accessible for our ESL students. So again, a great resource. And this last assessment idea, it was also created by Rachel Riggs, again, under that Creative Commons license, but it's a digital literacy action plan. So there's a lot more to this than I have the time to discuss today. So I've included in the resource document some additional information, and she even has a presentation that's on the Maryland Department of Labor's Virtual Learning Institute, kind of about how you can incorporate this. But kind of the short description is that it's something that you can create with your students. So if to kind of dive in and see what your students want to use digital technology for, and can they create a digital literacy goal that they can work towards? So you might not be working on this goal in class. It could be something that your students work on outside of class, but it's something that once you know your students' goals, it could inform what you do in your class. So some examples of some digital literacy goals your students might have. They might be very productive, like maybe a student might want to create and share videos for their business. It might be very communicative and personal. Use email or WeChat to communicate with grandchildren. Or it might be an educational goal. Find information for school research projects. So again, I encourage you, if this seems like something that interests you, to check out the information at the end of the presentation for further kind of guidance here. Okay, so we've assessed our students, and as you assess your students, you're going to start to develop a fuller picture of what your class looks like and where their digital literacy skills. So for example, you might find one student who wants to use technology, as we mentioned, to communicate with her grandkids. Another student needs to use a computer for work. You know, some students might be already have professional expertise in digital field from their home country. Some students might be really good with accessing the internet on a smartphone, but have never used an actual keyboard before. So with this kind of more complete view of your class, you can kind of continue on with your planning. So as you plan how to use technology, make sure you're thinking about technology purposefully. Don't use technology just for the sake of it. Sure, you may have heard of a fancy new app or you see another teacher using something, but is it going to be helpful to your students? And I feel like this is a really hard one. And this was a really hard one for me in the beginning to kind of change my view on this. So you want technology to be integrated into your instruction. You want it to serve a purpose. So that may be either to enhance student learning. You might use technology to kind of help further accomplish your ESL objectives, or you might be teaching explicit digital literacy skills in your class. So for that first point, if you are using technology to enhance your instruction, something that I've personally found really helpful is what's called the POST method framework. So with the POST method, we're going to go through kind of each letter. We're going to start with the letter P. First and foremost, consider the people. So start first with yourself and your students' technological skills. You know, you've assessed yourself, you've assessed your students. What can you already do? But also consider what you have access to. What do the students or you have access into the classroom? What do your students have access to at home if you're teaching a class online? If you have a really neat interactive digital tool that you want to use in your online class, but you know that several of your students are on their cell phones and they can't navigate between the Zoom window and another website, then that digital tool, no matter how awesome it is, no matter how much you want to use it, is probably not going to be a great choice for that class. So after you consider the people, consider your learning objectives or your goals. Make sure that your language learning goals figure higher in importance than a desire to use a certain digital tool. And then look at the strategies that you already have to achieve your objectives before you add in technology. Consider how adding in technology might change or evolve your objectives. That may be totally okay, but try and prioritize your initial objectives first. And then finally, pick out which technology tool fits best. So instead of starting with, hey, I have this great tool, how do I plug it into my class? Remember, start with the people, start with kind of the opposite way and choose the best tool to meet your needs. So in addition to choosing which digital tools to use that best support your language objectives, your ESL teaching objectives, we should also have specific digital literacy goals for our students, because again, that's so vital for our students to be able to get those digital literacy skills. And your digital literacy objectives are going to naturally differ according to the content, the goals, and the levels of your courses. So digital literacy goals may be very practically driven and technical, and they might be present in all your classes across all your levels. They might be things like how to create a safe password, how to use a keyboard and a mouse, how to use the basic features of Zoom. Or your digital literacy objectives might be life skills related, right? So many things since COVID have gone online now, scheduling appointments, searching for jobs, that stuff all happens online right now. And those are important life skills for our students. Or maybe your class has academic related goals. So using Microsoft Word to format a paragraph or evaluating online sources for reliability. So some of these objectives, they came right from that Maryland Digital Literacy Framework that I mentioned. Again, it's a really great resource. If you don't already know about it or aren't using it, I highly recommend it. And again, the link will be at the end of the presentation. So another strategy for you is to alternate introducing new content and new technology. When planning, it's helpful to keep this quote in mind. Digital literacy skills are best acquired when the language and the topic are familiar and only the digital format is new and unfamiliar. And there are many opportunities to make mistakes. Remember that growth mindset there. So let's look at a couple examples. So let's say you want to introduce a new tech skill of creating and submitting an audio recording. Instead of having students introduce or deal with new tech and brand new words, use technology to support repetition, right? Repetition is so important in ESL. So for example, you could have students read sentences that were written in a previous class, turned in and already corrected. So they have content repetition, but the technology piece is new. And again, just another plug, remember to keep in mind not to assess language with a new technology. So you're going to have too many confounding variables there to accurately assess your students. Another example, you can use technology that students are comfortable with to introduce new language. So for example, let's say you've already introduced and your students are very comfortable using Quizlet flashcards. So you can use that same Quizlet flashcard tool, there's a technology repetition, to kind of introduce a new ESL skill or a new piece of language. So your students can use Quizlet flashcards to preview the upcoming unit's vocabulary. So here the technology isn't new, but the language is. Another strategy, use routine to increase student comfort. So we do this with ESL, makes sense to do it with technology as well. So plan for routine. Have your technology integrated as part of classroom routine. As with English language teaching, repetition is so helpful. Don't just use a tech tool once and never come back to it. Give students repeated exposure. And routines help to lower that affective filter that may be holding students back a bit. They can begin to feel more comfortable with the technology and anticipate what to expect with technology use. So as we were checking in with our teachers to see how they were doing, integrating technology use in our classrooms, we got some great feedback from our lowest level ESL teachers. So our teachers that are teaching, new immigrants, pre-beginner level 0 students. And they really highlighted the importance of the use of routines. One teacher said, I have maintained the same 3 types of activities for every lab, so it's very routine for the students. And another teacher, I try to be consistent with my lab assignments. We do writing on Canvas, which is our learning management system. We do Burlington English, and then we do game if time permits. And this teacher said, I think this is really helping the students. So there you have it in planning, a little summary of what we've discussed so far. You want to make sure that you're assessing yourself. You want to assess your students. You might want to set individualized digital literacy goals with your students. We want to make purposeful technology choices. We want to mitigate technology challenges as much as possible by doing that in alternating, introducing new language and new technology. And we want to use routine to increase student comfort. All right, so you've got things planned. It's time to start teaching. So you don't need to, nor should you, turn your class into a computer skills class, unless you do happen to be teaching a computer skills class. But we do want to explicitly teach digital vocabulary and skills. So remember that it's likely that your students are encountering certain digital skills either for the first time ever, or for our ESL learners, even your most tech savvy student, they may be encountering those skills for the first time using the English language. So there's likely something to learn for everyone. So therefore, do explicitly teach that needed vocabulary. For us ESL teachers, right, this is our wheelhouse. Vocabulary is so important for ELLs. And what vocabulary you teach will depend on where your students are. And that's why that assessing piece is so important. For teaching vocabulary, you can use a pretest, like a picture to term matching, to see what your students already know. And to make it flexible for your students with different abilities, you can have something like a Quizlet flashcard study set, or maybe make a Google slideshow of level appropriate computer vocabulary terms. And then students can go ahead and choose to individually practice this vocabulary as much as they need. And we also want to teach some tech skills. So again, this is going to vary depending on your class's digital skills. Can all of your students proficiently use a mouse? Then you don't need to go over that mini lesson on how to use a mouse. But are a lot of your students only using the caps lock key when typing capital letters? Then taking 5 minutes or maybe even less to do a mini lesson on how to capitalize when typing would be worthwhile. And our teachers found this tip really helpful in terms of how to fit these things into your lessons. Consider doing like a daily tech tip or a daily digital skill vocabulary word. So this way, if there's a variety of digital skills levels in your class, there won't be as much time where maybe that more digitally tech savvy student might be bored, right? If you kind of highlight maybe one thing a day. All right, so this is my favorite one, and I'm sure we've actually all heard this before, right? But this is such a good teaching strategy that it always bears repeating. So model. Before you have students complete an activity on the computer, model it, especially at the beginning of the course. Don't assume that all of your students can take the direction, okay, class, open up XYZ website and be able to do it. You might need to go as basic as modeling how to kind of drag your mouse clicker over and double click on something to open up that internet browser. That's okay. And when you model, use visuals. This is really helpful when you're teaching online and you can't be there to guide your students, to point to where your students should put their mouse cursor, over the right icon. So sometimes this might mean literally printing out pictures of buttons. I did this for my students. When I was teaching on Zoom, I printed out pictures of key Zoom buttons, and I would literally hold them up to the camera to show students what button they needed to find on their screen. It could also mean making step-by-step instruction sheets with pictures that show students how to log into an app or maybe even your learning management system. So the more tech-savvy students may only look at the instructions once, maybe not even ever, or never go back to them. But your students who need more support can keep going back to these guides every time. Also, make sure you have students' full attention when you model. So once students have a laptop open or a computer in front of them, it's hard to get our students' attention back. So if you're in a computer lab where you have this capability, lock the students' computers. This is my go-to attention getter. Students have to lock up to you, sometimes slightly panicked that they broke something, but you have their attention. If you don't have that capability, model what you want students to do before you even go to the computer lab. Have them watch you do it first. And what does this mean online? So you can create a cue when you want students to take their hands literally off of their keys or their mouse and just listen. So you can even ask students to physically show their hands so you know that they're not clicking around. And once you model, let your students try it out. For your in-person students, don't do technology for a student. This can be a really hard one. I've been there before. There's only one student left trying to log into your LMS, and they are entering their login ID painfully slowly. And you just itch to reach over top of them and do it for them. Don't. You can certainly help, point to the place on the screen where they should click, or let them know if they mistyped a letter. But if that student always has someone doing the technology for them, they're never going to advance their skills. So tell yourself, model, don't do. So this is another tried and true teaching strategy, but again, so effective that it bears repeating and highlighting. You want to scaffold your digital literacy skills. So break up activities into steps. So in some of our classes, our classes have maybe an hour-long computer lab time. So don't feel as though you need to give instructions for that entire hour and then send your students off by themselves. Break activities down into steps. Have your students do something for 10 minutes and bring them back and model the next step. Introduce new tech tool features a little at a time. Let's say you want to have your students learn how to use Google Slides, or you want to do something with Google Slides. You don't need to have students explore and use all the features the first time they use it. Maybe your first Google Slides activity has students only using text, and in a subsequent activity, you have students learn how to insert images. So when students use technology individually for individual work, it offers them the ability to work at their own pace, both at their own ESL learning pace and their own digital skills pace. So this has differentiation built in right here, and we want to leverage that. But it does take some planning when you have students working at different paces. You might want to plan for students to accomplish an across-the-board required task first, but then plan for optional extension activities to support those students that can use technology more quickly and that are racing ahead through all the activities kind of you had planned. Always better to prepare more, right, rather than less. So some ways that you can do this for individualized learning. Offer students activities that have some replayability. So while there's nothing wrong with a fill in the blank type activity or a multiple choice quiz game, I love using Kahoot myself. With these activities, once the student completes it, they're done. And that student with high digital skills that kind of went through it pretty quick might be sitting there and waiting with nothing else to do. So include options for activities where students can spend a flexible amount of time on them and that can maybe be redone or replayed. Activities where there are no specific endpoints. So for example, we've mentioned this one before, but use Quizlet. And not only the flashcards. I know that some Quizlet activities have sadly now gone behind a paywall, but the flashcards and the matching game are still free. And those are both great repeatable activities. Another tip comes from the free website, Flippity. If you haven't checked that out, I highly recommend it. So Flippity has Google Sheet templates where you can create your own replayable activities. So for example, they have manipulative cards. So you can have students scramble and rearrange vocabulary words to make sentences. They have vocabulary matching games, board games, typing tests. So you can create a typing test using reading or text that your students have already studied. And again, there's a link for these tools at the end of the presentation. Another idea is to extend activities to the internet. So in this example, students are learning vocabulary related to products and shopping and how to talk about like defects or problems that could happen with things that they purchase. So you can have students first study the vocabulary, but then add an extension activity to the internet. You can ask students to go online, Google, and look for more types of defects that the targeted vocabulary might have. Like what other defects could a car have? A student with lower digital skills might only get to Google one product, might only get to Google that car. But a student with higher digital skills can go on and search for additional products. Both students are still getting that language practice and they're still getting digital literacy practice. And they'll both have something that they can share and contribute later to a group discussion, just moving at different paces. Or for example, after doing an English language unit on food, have students research the 5 food groups on myplate.gov and sort the unit's food vocabulary by food group. Maybe a student with lower tech skills might only get through one food group. Student with higher digital skills might be able to do more. Another idea for that individualized learning piece is to include projects. So they can offer students the ability to work at their own pace and also the ability to customize their projects according to their own digital skill levels. For example, maybe you could have students create a Google slide that summarizes the chapter that the class just finished reading on Bridge to Terabithia. Or you could have students contribute to a class Jamboard with home remedies for health problems. So students can vary how many features they add to their Google Slides, maybe just text, maybe pictures, maybe animations for your students with higher skills. Same thing with the Jamboard. Students can vary how many contributions they can make. But again, both students on both the range of the skills spectrum are getting practice with the targeted content and with their digital skills. And then how do you get these different activities to your students? A couple examples. So in our learning management system, we use Canvas. You can organize activities sequentially, something like this, where students move through them in an order, or which I have found great success with, you can arrange your activities to be more choice-based. So have a required activity or two that students have to complete first, and then offer a menu of activities that students can pick from based on their own interests or their own learning needs. And for planning purposes for a teacher, because you might be looking at this and thinking, oh, I got to come up with, 6 or 7 different computer activities every week for lab. What I like about these is some of these activities can be recycled and reposted on the next computer lab session, especially the replayable ones. And also the chances that a student will get through everything in one go would be low. So you can kind of recycle some of them for the next lab. Another strategy, use cooperative learning. So computers are great for individualized learning, but also cooperatively as well. So peer-to-peer learning's invaluable not just for content learning, right, but for digital skills too. So when introducing a new digital tool, so for example, like a Google Doc or Jamboard, consider doing it first in a group. So you can have your more technologically savvy student help lead the way, or maybe do even all the tech work. And the less tech savvy students can observe how the digital tool works before they have the pressure to use it themselves solo. This works really well too with breakout rooms in Zoom. Only one student in the breakout room needs to be sharing their screen or typing on the Google Doc or searching the internet. And the students with lower digital skills can get exposure to that digital tool or digital skill first in a low stakes environment. And with cooperative learning, we want to make sure that we're grouping our students intentionally, right? So if you're introducing or using a newer tech skill, group students so that each group has a student with that higher digital skills that can handle the technology tool. But at the same time, we want to assign roles and meaningful roles, right, within the group to make sure that even though a student isn't in charge of the digital aspect, they are active participants in the group activity. But still consider sometimes grouping students more homogeneously by their digital skills. So this works best when there are flexible goals for an activity or when there are multiple activities to choose from. So the higher digital skill group, they can choose an activity that's more aligned with their digital skill need or level. And the lower tech skill group can focus on a goal more aligned with their needs and their level. So the next couple strategies have to do with feedback, right? And so when we differentiate our teaching, we're also going to be differentiating our feedback. So we want to make sure we celebrate all successes. So for example, a student logged into Canvas independently for the first time, that gets a hearty praise, right? You walk over to another student and see that he's independently gone ahead and added animations to his group's Google Slides presentation. That also gets a hearty praise. We want to make sure that we're celebrating student progress on that individual level. And similarly, we want to give differentiated constructive feedback to students as well. For example, in this typing practice, this entry was done by a student who isn't comfortable with computers at all. First, I would congratulate the student on successfully typing anything. Point out the words that the students did spell correctly, and then focus on one thing at a time. In this case, you might want to start with showing the student how to press the shift key to make a capital letter and start there and see how that feedback goes. So on the other end of the spectrum, this tech-savvy student successfully typed the sentence correctly the first time. So you can first affirm that they did it correctly, and then you could go on to more nuanced feedback. For example, I saw that you were typing with just 2 fingers. Do you know anything about where you can put your hands to type faster? And feedback does not just need to pertain to the technical aspects of digital literacy, right? So in this example, the lesson goal was on how to correctly format an absent email, specifically with a proper subject line, a proper greeting, and a proper closing. So this real life example came from a student that was not comfortable at all with computers. So first off, you can congratulate her for successfully sending an email at all, which I did. And then focus on the lesson goal and give feedback on that subject line and that closing. Depending on how that feedback goes, in this case, I didn't even get to this point. I might not even touch the fact that she missed the mark with the content, right? And she didn't actually write to tell me why she was absent at all. On the other hand, this student with higher digital skills, they wrote a nice subject, a nice greeting, and a nice closing. After the positive feedback and the reinforcement there, you could get into some more nuanced feedback. So you could point out that it's more natural sounding to say, I couldn't come to class today, rather than I couldn't be in class today. Or you can give some pragmatic feedback that maybe the next step to making an email like this would be to add a line asking about missed homework or telling the teacher when he will return to class. And the last strategy in the teaching part for you, make use of supports when you can. So if your program can provide them, make use of teaching assistants. So have teaching assistants work with students with lower digital skills and give them some one-on-one support if possible. If you don't have teaching assistants, use peer helpers. So there's several students who log in super quickly and fly through activities. Ask them if they'd be comfortable being peer computer helpers. You can call in your peer helpers to float around the room and help other students log in or get started on a new technology before they sit back down and start their own work. If you're teaching online, make use of those students with higher digital skills, especially in offering help in their first language. You know, if they have a shared first language with a student who is kind of having some trouble, leverage that and have that student help out in the first language with digital skills. So in summary, for teaching, we want to explicitly teach digital vocabulary and skills. We want to model, remember, don't do. We want to scaffold digital activities for our students, leverage, that individualized learning with replayable activities, extensions to the internet, and projects. Use cooperative learning, give differentiated feedback, and use teaching supports when you can. So our last bit is the reflecting point. So after teaching, right, it's always best practice to look back and thoughtfully reflect on what went well and what can be improved, right? So we want to check in. How is your use of technology and tech tools going in your class? Do you have a routine? Can students reasonably anticipate what's going to happen in your class? For example, do they know that we will always have lab on Thursdays or that we'll try something new at the beginning of the month? Routine is, helpful in general. And again, it lowers that affective filter for our students. But we also don't want to just do the same thing every time, right? We don't want to stay stagnant. Go back to, your own assessment. Go back to that want to learn part of your digital skills assessment and check in on your students' goals. Are you trying out some of the tools that you said you wanted to learn? What's keeping you back from doing that? Maybe it's something like noticing, oh, I use Kahoot every time in lab. Again, Kahoot isn't bad. I personally love it, but maybe my students would benefit from trying something new. More specifically, I love the idea of reflecting on what specifically went well or what was challenging about technology today. So this example comes from my colleague, Katie. So, asking yourself and asking the students, what went well with working with technology today? What did you like about computer lab? Or what was hard about working with the computers today? And so she had, my colleague, Katie, she had her students just kind of like write down a quick reflection before the end of computer lab on how they felt about using the laptop cart one day. You can see she had a variety of answers. It's fun, but it's also difficult. To it gives me a headache, or it's so easy, or I learn better. So you can check in that, students who are proficient with technology aren't just feeling like the activities are too easy. One student did say it's too easy, but you also want to check out with your other students, or check in, with your other students who are challenged by tech and you want to make sure they're not just feeling defeated. And don't forget to check in on yourself, right? Did I get flustered when I couldn't figure out why the computer slides kept advancing? Was I able to adapt quickly and be flexible when students struggled with using Kahoot for the first time? So check in with your students, but also, check in with yourself as well. So that's what I have for you today. If you can see up here, I have the QR code for the resources list. Please check them out. And also I have my email address up here. If you have any questions or comments or want to share something that works particularly well for you, please feel free to do so.